Hello and welcome to JS Made Simple. Today we are going to replicate this scene which has been rendered in cycles with EV Blender engine. It's not going to be as precise or realistic as the cycles render, but it's going to be faster in rendering. It would render in about 250 frames would be rendered in about 250 seconds, each frame taking a second and at 720p. This particular scene in cycles has been rendered at 480p and each frame took about 10 to 20 seconds. Now let's open up Blender to replicate the scene in EEVEE. I'm going to use 2.93 for this render. Okay, once the blender opens up, just select everything in the scene and delete it. Now make sure that your cursor is in the center of the world. Press Shift S and go to cursor to world origin to bring it to the world origin. Press Shift A, then Q. Now you can see there is a cube. Press Tab to edit it. Go to face selector, select the upper face, press E and S, then bring it smaller, then press 3 on the number pad to bring it to side view. Go to wireframe mode and press E to bring the selected face down. Now you can see that there is thickness at the edges of the cube and there is also thickness at the bottom along with the upper part being opened. Now press Z and go to solid mode. Now you can see the edges are a bit sharp, so let's smooth them out. Then for to do that, go to modify tab, add modifier, go to bevel modifier. Now give it a bit lesser value, that is 0.4 or 0.3. Now you can see it looks a bit smoother and better. Now we have to add a hole at this side of the cube. To do that, press tab and go to edit mode. Make sure that you're in the face selector. Select this face, press Shift S and cursor to select it. This will bring the cursor to this face. Now press tab again to come out of the edit mode. Press Shift A, mesh, cylinder, rotate it along R axis, RX 90. Now resize it S, Shift Y to resize it along S and Z axis. I mean X and Z axis. Now resize it. Okay, a bit more. I think this should be enough. Let's make it up. Okay, yeah, this should be enough. Now press 7 to go to the top view. Now S, Y to allow it to size it along Y axis. Make sure that this end and this end both are on the either side of the cube. One end has to be inside, one end has to be at the outside. Now you can see both edges are in inside and outside. Now let's bring it a bit more down. Press 3, then press Z and go to wireframe mode. Then make sure it doesn't touch the bottom of the tank. G and Z. Okay, this should be enough. You can see that there is still more some space. Now Z and go to solid mode. Now select the tank, press on the modifiers tab, add modifier boolean. Now select the cylinder. Now you can see that there is going to be a hole, but you cannot see it. That's because this cylinder is blocking it. To remove the cylinder from the view, click on the cylinder, go to object properties, go to visibility, renders and viewports. This will hide it both from renders and viewports. Now you can see we have created the hole in the tank. Now we have to add the domain and the water properties, that is the water source. Now press 3 to go to side view, then Z to go to wireframe mode, press Shift S, cursor to world origin, press Shift A, cube. Now we have added a new cube, resize it, make it a bit smaller, then press G, Z and bring it to the top. Make sure it is within the tank. Then add another cube. It's going to be a bit bigger. Shift S, Shift A, cube. Make it a bit bigger than the. Okay. Now size it along the y-axis. GY. Okay. Now GY to move it along the y-axis. Okay. Now make sure that these two cubes, the water source and the tank, are within the domain, because domain is the limit of the water within which the water will be contained. Now press on the smaller cube because it is the source of water and go to the physics tab, click on fluid and give it a fluid property. Type is going to be flu and the flow type is going to be liquid. Geometry is going to be inflow and the initial velocity, the velocity at which the water will be coming out will be about zero point 0.5. You can change it as per your needs. Then select the domain and fluid. Since domain is going to be the limit or the wall that stops the water or the limit within which the water would be contained, so we'll be giving it a domain property. Make sure it's liquid. and you could give a resolution of 64, 128, 256. If you have a much better CPU, you can give it 120, 128 or 256. I'll be using 64 for this tutorial. Let me make the screen a bit bigger. Okay. Now go to the mesh properties, check the mesh property. In the cache tab, select modular, is resumable. Making it is resumable is that we can stop the bake. When we are baking the animation, we can stop the bake and see the already baked part and how it is. So make sure it is checked and just go to the, now select the tank. Now we have to give the tank a property, since when the water hits it, the water has to come out of this hole. To give it that property, press on fluid and give it the fluid property. Now rather than domain of flow, give it the effector and leave it at its default settings. The default setting should be enough. Now press and select the domain. In the domain, click the bake mesh. Now this will take some time depending on the capability of your CPU. So I'll just pause this part. Okay, now the bake has been completed. Now let's play this animation. Okay, now you can see the water is flowing out of this tank through the hole, and the water is collecting up in this tank and it's coming out at a velocity that we have set. But you can see something is weird here. When we press 1 on the number pad and go to the front view, you can see that the water hitting the, it's not the water hitting the domain is not very precise, which the animation is not really precise. To make it precise, let's bake the mesh. Before making the mesh, give it a use speed vector, then click bake mesh. This will take about the same time as the fluid bake, so I'll pause it. Okay, now the mesh bake has been completed, so you can see that the interactions with the mesh and the tank are a bit more precise. Okay, now you can see, now I'll render this in solid mode. Okay, so this is how it looks in the solid mode. Okay, see, look how precise it is. So now let's pause this animation and let's add a camera and a plane. Now press 3 on the number pad. Make sure that it is in the cursor is in the world origin. Press Shift A, plane, G, Z. Make sure it is below the water. Then S to scale it. Now we have to add a camera to the scene to capture the renders. How we could do that is Shift A, add a camera. Now we have to bring the camera to this setup in the viewport. Make sure that that the tank and the water and the source are visible. Okay, so this is how it should be now. So here I'll be placing the camera in this scene. Press Ctrl Alt 0. Now to make this a square render, resolution, set the resolution to 720. Now you can see it's a square. Now we have to render the scene in orthographic. With the camera selected, go to the camera properties. Rather than perspective, give it an orthographic. Now to zoom out, we can change the scale. Okay, this should be enough. Press N. Then go to the view, camera to view. Then just drag in the viewport to move the camera. Okay, so this should be enough. Okay, this is perfect. Now just uncheck this view to camera. Okay, so this will be how our scene will be rendered. Okay, one more thing, just make sure that the render engine is set to EEVEE and check ambient occlusion, screen space reflections and motion blur. Even after that, much will not be visible because we haven't added a light source. Now to add a light source, press Shift A. Now go to lights, add a sun, move it to the top, GZ. Now light properties, I'll be giving it a light strength of about 30. Now let's view how it looks in. Oh wow, look how it looks in EV. The water has doesn't have the water property yet. I'll be adding it now. Okay, so this is fine. Now to give the water and the glass, that is a tank is a glass, the properties, it is a bit different, a way too different than how it is in cycles. Since EV and cycle are both very different than each other, in EV it's way too difficult to replicate these properties. So we are going to use node editor for this one. Open up the shade editor, that's right here, shade editor. Now with the water selected, Go to the materials panel, add a new property, new material. Now you can see there is already by default principal BSDF and material output. Delete the principal BSDF by pressing X, Shift A, then add glass. In cycles, all we have to do is connect this glass to the material output and give it a 1.33 refractive index. But in EV it is very different. Now we have to also add a transparent BSDF. Shift A, search and add a transparent. Make sure it's transparent. Okay, it's a transparent BSDF. Now to connect this both, we have to add a mix shader. Mix shader. I'll make it a bit more expanded. Okay. Okay. Now let's connect the mix shader to the material output. Connect the transparent BSDF to shader 1 and shader 2. Make sure that the transparent is connected first, then the glass. Now for the factor, we'll be adding another node, that is Fresnel node. And what this Fresnel does, it gives the corners of the glass a bit of a different refractive index, because you have seen the edges of the glass look a bit different than the transparent property of the edges of the glass are a bit different than the mainframe of the glass. So I'll set this to about 1.03 and set this to 1.03. Now I'll be adding a math node, Shift A, math, Shift A, math. Okay, the math has been added. Now mix shader. Now factor will be connected to the value and the type would be multiply, clamp. We'll change this value by observing how it looks in EV. Now connect the value to the factor. Okay, now it's time to see how our water looks like. Now go to this tab and click F12. Okay, so it looks a bit dark. I think we can bring in a few more changes. Oh, yes, there we can. Press N, then go to the options. Then rather than opaque, make it alpha hashed, and rather than shadow, make it alpha hashed. Then make sure that the screen space reflection is checked. Now let's view it the properties. Press F12. Oh, look, that's the water. It looks way too transparent. Now to solve this problem, just click on the plane and give it a bit of a color and also make it a bit less darker. Scroll down. Okay, so let's make it a bit more darker. Okay, now let's try to view F12. Even now it's not visible. Okay, then let's change the properties of the water itself. Let's increase this to 3 or 30. Let's increase this to 30. Now press F12. Okay, now the water is visible. You can see the water is visible now. Okay, so this looks fine. We can change it afterwards. Now we have to give the same property of this glass to the tank. Now click on the tank. First click on the water. Go to the material panel and give it a name of water. Enter. Now click on the glass. Click on the small button here, then select water. Now since we don't want the water and the glass to have the same properties, we are going to manipulate the properties of the glass. So to do that, just click on this material. This will duplicate the already created material. So if we bring any changes in this part of the glass, it will not reflect on the water. So now in the editor, we'll be changing this value to about this IQR will be changing it to 1.45. Okay, by default it is at 1.45. For water, it is supposed to be 1.33. Click on the water and set 1.33. This is the refractive index of water, and this is the refractive index of glass. So this will be much more precise now. So now let's render it this scene F12. Oh, okay. So this part isn't visible. So to make it visible, just increase this to about 40 maybe. Now press F12. Okay, so the visibility is increasing. So I'll be increasing this. I'll make sure it's at 70s, F12. Okay, so I think this should be enough. Or do I have to change it a bit more? Let's see. Let's experiment with it. 7 F12. Okay, so it's visible even now. I will bring this up a bit. Okay, now it looks okay. The glass property, it's a bit difficult. You can just keep manipulating these values until it actually looks like a glass. Okay, bring this whole thing up. F12. Okay, this looks fine. Okay, so now with both these we have given the properties to both of these, and let's give the sun a bit of a different property. Click on the sun and give it a 30. Then if you want to change the color, we can give it a bit of a blue color. Now let's see how does it look. F12. Okay, now it looks fine. Now we'll be, since we have done all the properties, we have given the materials to both this water and the tank. Now it's time to render the scene. Let's close this node. First click on right click here and join areas. Click and close this. Now go to the port and change it to EEVEE. Make sure ambient and all these properties are checked. 720. Now we have to select the source where we'll be rendering this. Output, we can set the output to the place we want. So I'll just output here. Add a file, renders, okay, accept. We'll be render this in form of images. But we have to do one more thing. We have to add a camera animation. Make sure that the camera just zooms in and zooms out of the scene. So to do that, with the camera selected and set the frame to 0. Okay, so this is going to be set to 0. Okay, now we are at 0. Now with the camera selected, click on the camera tab, and on the orthographic tab, let's zoom in. Okay, so this is the first frame. Now to add the frame, just click here on this small circle here beside the orthographic. You can see it has added a frame here, keyframe here. Now let's take the this to 250 and zoom out a bit. Okay, this looks fine. So now click here to add another key. Now if we play this scene, this is how it's supposed to look. Okay, you can see the water coming out and the camera will be zooming in. If you want to see this in render, I mean the EEVEE, just go to this tab and click on render region. Now if we render this, it will only render the region that is visible. Okay, this looks fine. Now stop the animation. Just make sure that you have selected the folder, PNG and all this stuff. Now go to render and render animation. You can see each scene would take hardly 1 second. Now I'll be pausing this out. Okay, now our scene has rendered. You can see the all the 250 frames have been completed. Now just close this up and let's just go to this, click on this plus mark, go to video editing, then add an image or sequence, then go to the Lego movie, the folder in which you have saved all these images. Press on one image and press A to select all the images, then press enter, and you can see, okay, so bring this, drag this all the way up to 1. You can see it's right here. While dragging, you can see, make sure it's at 1 and make sure this is at 250. By default it would be at 250. Now when you press space, you can see our animation is being played. You can see it is zooming out, the water coming out. Okay, so this has been rendered in EEVEE and it took just 250 seconds to render this whole scene, which would have taken about 5 or 10 minutes to do that, or 5 to 20 minutes maybe in cycles. So now make sure it is at 250. Then with that, now let's select, go here, accept. But this time we'll be rendering this out as, since it's a video, we'll be making it out, I mean taking it out as a video. PNG, click on FFmpeg image, I mean video, then encoding will be MP4. Then that's it. Now just go to the render tab and give it render. Okay, so now this is how our final render will look like. You can see it just looks fine, it's very good. It still isn't precise. Maybe I think we have to increase the, I mean the fluid's resolution. If you increase the resolution, it's going to look much better. But it's good. You can see because it has been rendered in EEVEE, it's still fast and it took just 250 seconds. So it's good. Okay, thank you.